Alright, so this video is going to be about why tanking sucks in the NFL. Talking about it because people have been saying that the Texans, they lost the game against the Cowboys, that they were leading for much of the way, that they were possibly tanking. We're just going to look at what happens when you try to tank in the NFL and why it doesn't really work as a strategy like it does in other sports, such as the NBA. So, this is what happens when teams try to tank, at least blatantly, in the NFL. Um, this happens in the NBA too, but we haven't really seen it much in the NFL. They stripped the Dolphins of two of their picks, a first rounder and a third rounder, in separate years, because they'd been accused of paying their former coach Brian Flores extra money to lose games. So the owner was suspended and fined money after an investigation. The first thing that I'm going to say about why tanking is bad in the NFL is just because there's so many players and they have such niche responsibilities that are all pretty important to winning games. So, I mean, obviously, here they have a fullback, so that's kind of not really important anymore. You can put like another wide receiver. But yeah, if your offensive line is terrible and you have a great quarterback, he's not going to have time to throw in the pocket. If you have a great quarterback, his receivers can't catch. Um, that's also going to be a problem if they can't get open, if they can't catch. Um, it doesn't matter so much about running backs and interior line. They don't really get picked highly in the draft. So people wouldn't really be tanking for those positions anyway. But the point is more like, I mean, you could have four great offensive linemen, one of your tackles is terrible, and that's a problem. And maybe tanking could solve that. But what if your quarterback isn't very good? Or there are little weaknesses that you can have that the other team can attack, and they can attack them specifically on each play. Um, if you have one great defensive end, pass rusher, an edge rusher, you could just have these two guys double team them, and then everybody else has to beat a single team. And if they can't, then you have great protection in the pocket. So these are the type of things that teams can scheme around if you have weaknesses that are prevalent across a lot of your team, which is kind of required to lose in tank, right? You have to have a bad team because the players out there aren't trying to tank. This is their livelihood, so they're trying to play as well as they can to either show up for other teams, stay on the current team for the next season or the full season. Um, but yeah, players and coaches don't really tank because their jobs are on the line. So it's more of a front office thing. You have to purposefully build a bad team, and that type of thing. Just it's not fixable through 1 year of the draft. So you'd have to tank for several seasons, which we've seen teams have unintentionally done and still been bad for long periods of time, such as the Browns, Jaguars. This is the other thing that really sticks out to me of why tanking is bad in the NFL. So in the NFL, obviously, there's only 17 games in the regular season, and you don't really score that often, at least touchdowns. This is NFL team touchdowns per game. Leading the league is Philadelphia with 3.8, and at the bottom is Denver, the Broncos, with 1.4. So somewhere in the middle, you're going to be around, 2.4, 2.5 touchdowns per game. Obviously, there's also field goals, but I'm just counting the touchdowns right now. So this is how you can see that there's going to be a lot of random variance. If there's only a few touchdowns per game, what if even just the worst team in the league at scoring touchdowns, Denver, gets a free touchdown? They go from 1.4 to 2.4, and suddenly they've almost doubled their touchdowns per game just off of, maybe like a pick six or just a bad play by someone on the other team. They give up a score, a blown coverage, whatever it is. These matter a lot. Whereas in the NBA, you're scoring, this is the field goals made per game, you're scoring almost 10 times more, up to 20 times more, depending on who you want to compare. The top team in the league, 43 field goals made per game. This is not including free throws. And at the bottom, Miami with 38. So somewhere in the middle, you're looking at like 41, 42 field goals made per game. If if a team in basketball accidentally just gives up a wide open three, does that really matter? Not really, because there's 43 or 42 other times that that team is going to score anyway, and that your team is going to score anyway. So the point is that this kind of beats it out of like the randomness out of the game in basketball. If you're a really bad team, over the course of an 82 game season, you're going to have a very bad record. In the NFL, there's a lot less scoring, there's a lot less games. You could get lucky a few times, win a few more games than you probably should have due to the random variance, and you can just walk away with a playoff spot or a worse draft pick or maybe a better draft pick if you're a good team that lost and got some bad luck. So we don't really see that in the NBA. If you're bad, you're going to be bad. It's just how it works. You know, there's too many games, there's too much scoring. But in the NFL, that's not really a problem because you don't see the same amount of scoring per game and you don't see the same amount of regular season games. There's only 17. This is also another part of it. Once you get to the NFL playoffs, it's kind of easy to advance if you look at it from just the perspective of wins needed. So this is the playoff bracket that is currently used in the NFL. The first seed in each division gets a bye, but let's say you're the 7 seed, right? Let's say you're the last seed. You only have to win 3 games to get to the Super Bowl. It's that simple. You win 3 games and you're in the Super Bowl as the last seed in the NFL playoffs. You could just get a lucky game here, a lucky win, and you're moving on. You only have to do that a couple times and you're in the Super Bowl. Whereas if you look at the NBA, in order to actually win a playoff series in the NBA, even in the first round, you have to win 4 games out of 7. So, we're looking at 3 games to get to the Super Bowl in the NFL. You're looking at 12 wins to get to the NBA Finals. 16 wins to actually win the NBA Finals. And, you could be playing 3 extra games in each series. That's the maximum, 7-game series. So, you could be playing 21 games just before you even get to the finals. It's a possibility. So there's a lot more games, a lot more scoring. Like I said, it really just kind of beats the randomness out of it when you're playing in the NBA. It's really hard to just be a fluke winner. It's a lot easier to be a fluke winner in the NFL, and that's kind of what makes the sport great, right? You get to see some random stuff happen sometimes. Now let's compare the drafts. This is a big part of tanking, right? Obviously, because that's the whole point. You get a good draft pick. So when we look at the NFL draft, there's 32 picks per round because 32 teams. We got 7 rounds and about 256 picks because there's compensatory selections and all of that stuff. So it varies per year, but about 256 picks, okay? NBA draft, only 60 picks every time. There's 30 picks per round because there's 30 teams, only 2 rounds. So if we just ignore the rounds for a minute, let's compare the math. So 1 out of 32, that's 3.1%. It's about the same in the NBA draft. So your pick for that round is about the same percentage of the round. But if we just ignore the rounds and we just go, what's my first round pick out of the whole draft? Well, 1 out of 256, very small percentage here. It's 0.3%. Whereas in the NBA draft, you still got 1.6% here. 1 out of 60 is still 1.6%. So your first round pick is still a very large chunk of the draft there. But this is when it gets, really obvious here. So when you're selecting in the first round, let's say you're the best team in the NFL, you won the Super Bowl. You'd have the 32nd pick in the first round. Well, the 32nd pick, by the time that comes around, only 12.5% of the draft is actually over. 32 out of 256, 12.5%. So 87.5% of the entire player pool that's going to be drafted is still there, still remaining in the NFL draft. So even if you're the best team, you're still getting a top 13% player, right? With your first round draft pick. But in the NBA, it is completely different. By the time that you're picking, if you have the best record in the NBA, you're picking 30th out of 60. 50% of the draft is already over, and only 50% of that player pool is still remaining, as opposed to the 87.5 for your first round pick if you're the best team in the NFL. If we compare that right there, if we just like kind of set these evenly, 12.5%, that's how much of the draft is over in the NFL draft if you're the best team picking in the first round. If we set that evenly to a 60 pick draft, that number, 12.5%, would be picking eighth in the 60 pick draft, which is the NBA. So the worst NFL first rounder is equivalent to about the eighth pick in the NBA draft. But it's completely different if we set the NBA draft to the NFL one, because that 50% of the NFL draft would be pick 128. So the equivalent of the worst first rounder in the NBA is about a fourth rounder in the NFL draft. So completely different here. This is why you tank in the NBA, because if you have a later pick, you're only picking about halfway through the draft, the entire draft, and you're going to be getting a player that is the equivalent of like a fourth round pick in the NFL draft as your first selection. So that is a big reason why tanking is successful in the NBA, a good idea in the NBA, maybe not the greatest idea in the NFL, because you're still guaranteed to get that top, 10, 12.5% player, and you're going to get several more picks later that are still better than that guy in the NBA who's picked 30th. So here's another thing that I wanted to show here. This is the Jacksonville Jaguars first round draft picks, okay? It's a little bit depressing if you're a Jaguars fan, but I just wanted to show this. It shows that being routinely bad does not mean that you're going to get great draft picks and eventually become good. 2008 to 2017 here, we're looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars picks. I'm just going to try to highlight it here. I mean, this is pretty sad, right? We have top 10 picks 10 years in a row here, 10 drafts in a row, and really nobody that great except for Jalen Ramsey. Leonard Fournette contributed for them. Blake Bortles did get them to a conference championship game, but they lost. You have some really bad busts in here. Jokel, Blackman, Blaine Gabbert, a lot of these guys just not that good. And, 10 seasons in a row, and you're still picking in the top five. Look at this. I mean, 2012 to 2017, top five picks every single year. And maybe like three of these guys were good contributors. I mean, only one of these guys is here highlighted as an All-Pro, I believe. So, the Pro Bowl, not All-Pro. But Jalen Ramsey was a great player. So, for the Jaguars, he still is a pretty good player, I guess. But yeah, just looking at it like this, they've had two first overall picks back-to-back here, Trevor Lawrence and Trayvon Walker. A little too early to tell, but the Jaguars have been pretty terrible since 2008, except for the one season where they made the conference championship and obviously lost, then immediately went back down to mediocrity. So I'm just going to show the Cleveland Browns, too, because they're a good example. Look at all these times that they've lost. I mean, they've never been better than second in their division since 2007. So, yeah, routinely finishing at the bottom of your division can be a complete curse. They were fourth. Look at all these streaks of fourth. I mean, they went at an 0-16 season, 1-15, 3-13, all in a row. So yeah, being bad is not really a desirable position. If you're intentionally making a bad team, it's very difficult to get out of that, especially if you're not hitting on your draft picks. And this is the last point I want to make. It's this in the NBA. There's basically no second round picks or undrafted players that become that great. We had our first second round pick become MVP. It was Jokic. He did it back to back, and it just happened recently. Another thing that's highlighted right here, we had our first undrafted Hall of Famer, and it's considerably easier to make the NBA Hall of Fame because it's just the Basketball Hall of Fame. It's not like the NFL Hall of Fame, so the bar is a lot lower. There's the cultural impact players that make it all the time, and Ben Wallace made it. He was the first undrafted player in the modern era to make the Hall of Fame. Whereas when we look at the NFL, I mean, if you're undrafted, you still have a great chance to make the Hall of Fame or make a team. I mean, relatively, not a great chance relative to a first round pick or something, but relative to the NBA or other sports, being undrafted isn't really that big of a deal. I mean, we have Kurt Warner was undrafted. You also have Warren Moon, both Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Warren Moon was a little bit earlier than Kurt Warner here. I don't, but he's not on this list. I still want to mention him. Antonio Gates, future Hall of Famer, tight end, 8 Pro Bowls. I mean, NFL tight end record, 116 career touchdown receptions. I don't know if that's still true at the making of this video, but it was at the writing of this article, which was May 2021. So I don't know. I don't think Gronkowski broke that record. Um, but maybe he did. Still really impressive for an undrafted player to set a record for his position. You have plenty of offensive linemen here. John Randall, great Hall of Fame defensive tackle. You can look at the list here. You got James Harrison. Uh, you know, you can be a great player still if you're undrafted in the NFL. It's completely possible. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of go over my thoughts on what tanking in the NFL really looks like, if it's good or not. I don't think it is. I think it sucks. But, if you disagree, that's completely fine. Maybe leave a comment with your thoughts. I tried to bring the best evidence here, and I think my best points are mostly with just how the drafts work differently in these leagues, why you see tanking in the NBA, and not so much in the NFL, and why it's really hard to build a good football team if you've intentionally made it bad in the first place. Yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed.